You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
Feel like who art Ed?
Try to slice it.
Who art is Mr. Wood art Ed me?
Good. Either way, it's ambiguous. It works on so many levels.
I know.
That's off to a great start.
Welcome to Who Arted, weekly art history for all ages. I'm your host, Kyle Wood, and today my guest is the author of an upcoming book that I am personally very excited about because I absolutely love art and I love dogs, and this book brings the two of them together. Jessica Poundstone has a new book coming out called Museum of Dogs, a romp through art history for dog people. It's coming from Chronicle Books, and it's going to be hitting your favorite bookstores starting on Tuesday, May 6th. Thank you so much, Jessica, for coming on. I really appreciate your making time for me.
My gosh, thank you so much for having me.
So, congratulations on the book. I do have to ask, though, it may seem a bit obvious, because, like I said, I love art, I love dogs, but what made you want to write this book, or how did you think to put these together?
Yeah, I also love dogs. I love art and I love museums. And so, actually, it's surprising that it took as long as it did for me to think of this to do, but it really started when I was on the Metropolitan Museum of Art's website. And I knew from way back from something I had read that they had started offering all of these public domain images. So I had offered up the images that they have on their website for anyone to use for free. And I kept that in mind as a resource because in my day job, I'm an artist. So I was on their website looking for some vase shapes. I was curious about ancient vases and, had a project and was like, bulbous, tall, what are the different shapes that ancient vases came in? And I was looking around and seeing all of these wonderful things. And for some reason, it just occurred to me, what if I were to enter the word dog into this search engine? And I did. And treasures appeared. And I was just blown away. I think every time I'd gone to museums, you're always looking for the things that kind of light you up. And so I think the dogs at museums had always been on my radar. It's like, oh, look, in that painting, in the tiny little corner of the painting, there's a dog. And that's so cute. Or, maybe you would see a dog in a hunting scene or on a Greek vase in a chase or something like that. So I don't think I expected to see a lot of artwork where the dog was sort of the main character. Mm-hmm. And that's really, there's also a lot of dogs in a lot of peripheral roles in a lot of art, but main character dogs are abundant in art and have been since ancient times. So the feeling was that I could not wait to show everyone I knew these dogs that I had found.
See, that's interesting to me because I have always thought of dogs as sort of on the periphery of art because, we see dogs that are symbolic of something, the lap dog and everything like that occasionally in a picture or off to the side. But you're right. There is something about seeing pets in fine art that lights people up. I know in my own classroom, kids are always reacting to the dog that they find in it, or really pets generally, animals generally. They see something, and a prime example would be like George Seurat's Sunday Afternoon on La Grande Jatte.
Yes.
Like the woman walking her pet monkey through the park. It's like that's the talk of the classroom. Forget about the pointillism, forget about the historical significance. It's just like animals are rad, and we can all agree on that. And yet museums don't really feel like a pet-friendly environment. I feel like I've been yelled at enough for getting too close to the works that like I would never think to bring or introduce an animal into that environment. And yet throughout history, dogs have been our loyal companions, and they've been such a big part of our lives and becoming an even bigger part of our lives today. I mean, think about how many pet parents are out there. I think it's so cool that you're bringing us this book that says dogs are not just an accessory or an afterthought. They can be the central focus of a piece.
Yeah, totally. And, you know, the ancient Greeks, the ancient Romans, the ancient Egyptians, they all agree with you. So I think you're in good company.
I'll take it. I will take it. I don't know that I would endorse the other viewpoints that the ancients had, but
Sure. There are some problematic relationships there, but
but I like to focus on the good stuff. So can you tell me about some of the awesome dogs that you've seen, and maybe some, let's drop some names. Who are some famous artists that we may have heard of that did stuff with dogs in their work?
Yeah, some of them in the book. Klimt is in here with a sketch of some poodles, which apparently Klimt was not a super dog guy, more of a cat guy with
Yeah,
maybe 7 to 9 cats in a studio at all times. But someone brought some dogs in and he did a sketch, and they're lovely.
yeah, because there's always that Klimt joke about, he used like cat urine as a fixative in his
Oh, yes.
drawings and stuff.
Yeah. He had a steady supply, apparently. It's not a problem. Toulouse-Lautrec is in here with us, another sketch of a couple of dogs. And since the book was finished, I have found many other pictures from Lautrec that he did of dogs. And so that's been fun to see. So maybe that will be a future book with more of his work in it. Franz Marc, who was had like this mystical connection to animals, has a picture in this book of 2 dogs that are white dogs running in the snow. It's I think it is probably the most beautiful picture in the book to me. He had Siberian sheepdog, and his dog's name was Rusi. He also apparently, I learned during this, had pet deer, a couple of pet deer named Schlick and Hani. So that's just fun to know.
That is.
Yeah, it was fashionable to have some pet deer. We've got Rembrandt, we've got Renoir, we've got Manet. I think those are all of the big name drops in the book.
I love it. And I love the unexpected pet deer. I mean, you always read about like artists seem to have the most odd and unexpected pets, whether it's like Dali or Kahlo. Like we always hear about like these pets that you would never think of. But it's kind of cool and fun. And as we talk about the dogs, though, I do want to start to think about what can we glean from the presence of these dogs in the artwork, and what are you seeing as maybe trends and how dogs are portrayed? And I'm curious, like historically and culturally, is it different, the way that a dog might have been portrayed in an ancient Greek or Roman work compared to how Lautrec was doing it and how contemporary artists work with that subject matter? And I know there's probably a lot of variability even within cultures, but I want to start to classify, like, what are we seeing and how are we thinking and interpreting these works?
Yeah, there is when a dog is a peripheral character in a piece, a lot of times art historians and art critics and folks are talking about how that dog is symbolizing fidelity, loyalty, the sort of core characteristics of that we think of when we think of dogs. There's also a lot of symbolism. One of the pieces in the book is a bronze figurine of a dog that is created by an African tribe, created to weigh gold dust. That was their primary currency. And
Hmm.
so they have a very rich culture of storytelling, lots of, basically fables. So every piece that they made out of bronze that was a different figure represented a different story from their culture. And it was meant to really, they're handling this every single day. It's meant to remind them of the stories and the morality and morals of their culture, just like fables,
Hmm.
would. So that was one really cool sort of uh, symbolism and interpretation of a dog that I just wasn't, expecting to find. A lot of hunting dogs in paintings. I did not include any of those in the book, but because I didn't need to, and I thought, let's have some things that are more unexpected. But big tradition of, especially in Britain, people love the fox hunt, love their dogs. In China, it was um, a symbol of wealth, or like, hey, look at my horse. Hey, look at
Hmm.
my dog. These paintings that were basically status symbols is another kind of thread.
That
Yeah, I'm sure there's more. Those are the ones that pop to mind.
that's interesting. I never really thought of a dog as a status symbol, but I
Hmm.
guess on some level it might be a show. Like, I mean, if it's an exotic dog, if it's from another place, there's trade involved. There's the fact that you have the resources and the wealth to support another creature and take
Yeah,
another thing in as a pet, and it's not cheap to own a dog, but it is so rewarding.
yeah.
Uh, Now, after a short break, we've started to hint at this, but I always like to dive a little bit deeper. So, after a short break, I want to get into some of the specific works you have talked about in the book. Welcome back. My guest today is Jessica Poundstone, and we are talking dogs in the art world because her new book, Museum of Dogs, a romp through art history for dog people, is coming to bookstores on Tuesday, May 6th. And I am just an art lover and a dog lover, so this was right up my alley. Uh, Now, I asked you if you could give me some specific works that we could talk about. I like to drill down into some specific works. And so we've got here actually two images of the same dog by two different artists, right? We have a Renoir and a Manet painting of the same dog. That is amazing to me. How did that come about that both of these famous artists are doing the same dog?
Yeah, they had the same friends who brought this dog back from Japan. So um, there was this guy named Henry Czerniewski, and he was an art collector. He got very excited when kind of Asia opened up to travelers and tourists, and he headed out with his friend, who was an art critic named Theodore Duret. And they were both really early supporters of the Impressionists and knew both Renoir and Manet. So they came back. Czerniewski ended up coming back with like 5,000 things from his travels over 2 years. 3,600 of those things were Japanese objects. And he started his own art museum. I mean, I've been there. It's in Paris. It was a built for purpose building so that he could show the world all of these, things that he brought back. But one of the things they brought back, and I actually just found this when I was researching this a little bit deeper for our conversation today. But Duret wrote a book about their travels in Asia called Voyage in Asia. And that was published in 1874, which is kind of crazy because that was like within a year from when they got back. He was probably writing it all along. But He told the story of how they found Tama, the Japanese spaniel. He said they found her. We were passing by Koriyama when a little girl who was carrying a little dog in her arms agreed to sell it to us. So there was a street vendor with a dog, and they decided to buy the dog from this little girl. So they named the dog Tama, which means jewel in Japanese. This type of dog, the Japanese Spaniel, was kind of the preferred dog of Japanese royalty. So that's fun. But they brought her back to France. And Duray commissioned Manet to paint a portrait of her. And Czerniewski commissioned the painting by Renoir.
Oh, that's interesting. And I do have to say, I was a little bit nervous on that story as you started talking about a little girl had a dog that, and I'm just like, please tell me they did not steal the dog
from that girl. Yeah, they knocked it down and ran.
But that is interesting to me because I always think of, and longtime listeners have heard me talk about this so many times, but like that 19th century as Japan was opening up to trade, I mean, forced to open up to trade with the Western world. You know, that was so revolutionary and such a big significant influence on the Impressionists and Post-Impressionists through the woodcuts. I've talked ad nauseum about that, but it's important to remember it wasn't just woodcut prints and hokusai filtering out into the world. It was, you know, it was all sorts of elements of culture, including these dogs, which I didn't know about. So I'm always super excited when I learn something new. I love that. So thank you so much.
Oh yeah. Yeah. He brought back, to your point, I took this note of what he brought back. And again, I was lucky enough to be in there and see all these objects, some of which were just breathtaking, you know. And also I should say that Czerniewski did his acquisitions very ethically, according to many accounts. Like, they were purchased from people who were selling them. They were not, you know, rated or anything like that. But bronzes, ceramics, paintings, prints, carved wooden objects, photographs, illustrated books. So, yeah, him bringing all those things back, putting them in a place where everyone could see them, and having these close relationships with all of these artists of the day who were the Impressionists. Yeah, they were able to see that, take it in, spend time with these objects, and it had as you're saying, a big impact on how they saw the world and what was possible for them in their artwork.
Yeah. And so now, as we talk about the Impressionists, and I should clarify, we're talking about Edouard Manet, not Eugene Manet, because, you know, the brothers both were artists. And sometimes I just say Manet and I'll say like, oh, Manet was married to Morisot, but like that was Eugene Manet. And we're talking about Edouard Manet, the guy who painted the luncheon, the famous you know, the nude figure luncheon in the park and the Olympia figure were two of his probably most well-known and prominent. But I think what's interesting with Manet, though, is as much as we talk about him as like in line with the Impressionists, and sometimes people talk about him as like, you know, a father of Impressionism, he didn't actually show with the Impressionists, right? Like, he was influential with them, but he wanted to be in the salon, often rejected. He had his stuff in the Salon des Refusés, but he wasn't in like that first initial exhibition of the Impressionists and stuff like that. But as we look at this I guess looking at both paintings side by side, what strikes me as I look at the Manet, because I guess we're talking so much about different cultures and stuff, I actually see almost like a Spanish style influence here. Like, the Manet version feels to me like it could have been painted by like Diego Velázquez or something. You know, it feels so dark and high contrast and dramatic with these shadows and stuff. Like, as you're looking at that painting, or I guess either of the paintings, what's jumping out at you?
Well, one thing that's really interesting that I, again, didn't know, up in the left corner of the Manet painting is a painted name of the dog, Tama. And in the Renoir painting, it's very faint, but it is also there in the same general space, the upper left-hand corner. And that putting the name of the animal up in the corner was something that they did again with, a king who wanted a picture of his horse. So it was sort
Mm.
of this point of pride and um, showing off, showing off. And so I think that is so funny, for them to, I think it's a joke. It seems to be kind of like an inside joke. It's like, oh, yes, all of these noble horses of these kings in this tradition. Here is a noble, ridiculous little dog, because
Yeah.
I don't think they're the, the Manet, it's sort of this what I've read about it is that this figure in the front that's on the floor is this Japanese doll, which again
Hmm.
indicates where this dog is from, that the dog has sort of defeated, and it's this playful little warrior. The Manet piece feels very playful and silly to me, and dramatic, and I think there's like an irony there that's fun. The Renoir piece just feels luscious, just like most Renoirs. It's like the dog is sort of floating in this beautiful sea of color. There's a little slash under of color that they think was probably a ribbon tied around the dog's neck, that really kind of adds something interesting and that stands out. It's kind of a tangerine color. It's got one paw lifted, which again is maybe a nod to the way that many of those horses were painted, where they have one, hoof raised in the air, which is also just sort of funny. But it's obviously the same dog. And when I saw these two paintings and realized that it probably was the same dog, I kind of freaked out. I was like, oh my God, what? What is the story here? How did these, because the years, the Manet was done in 1875, Renoir was done in 1876. Obviously, they were somehow related. So it was really fun to uncover that story.
Well, it's amazing at how much like these famous figures from art history seem to interact. And I mean, it
Mhm.
makes sense when you think about like it's a small circle of like-minded people who are supporting each other, and that's how they become the big towering figures, is because they banded together and they did their own version of it, but they all had these revolutionary ideas about what art is and what it could be. And I love this as a sort of example of how they would flout conventions and
Mm.
do stuff that is a little bit subversive. I mean, taking the traditional regal portraiture of a horse and stuff and taking those elements and apply it to a dog. That's kind of funny. I'm going to be honest, I could not see in the Renoir the name. Like
Yeah.
I don't know if that's like, how Renoir is always criticized as like he wasn't very good at painting because everything has that hazy sort of look, or if it's just like my old man eyes, because like I
I wish I
I
could be as not good at painting as Renoir, but sure. Yeah.
no, but it's a
Yeah.
common critique. I
Yeah.
don't
Yeah.
levy it because, the dude is still probably better at painting than I am.
Rest in peace.
Rest
Paint
in
in
peace,
peace.
but he could still probably paint circles around me.
Yeah, I think if you zoom in, you can definitely see it, like on the high res file. But yeah, it's so faded. And who knows? I don't know if it was always meant to sort of be sort of ghostly over there in the corner and not too prominent, or if that's just sort of what's happened over time, that pigment aged and it's faded. But yeah, it's a fun element in there.
Yeah, and I guess, yeah, that is probably true that some of the pigments could have faded because I know a fair number of impressionists were kind of early adopters of some synthetic pigments
Hmm.
because that was another, like, that was the new technology of the day. The tube of paint was a 19th century invention, and the mass production of these pigments. And, that's another thing that I don't want to bore people that I have already talked about this with, but I think it's worth being mindful of how all of these things that we don't think of as technology really
Yeah,
were new, fresh, and exciting in the day, and that influenced the work in the long term because some of those pigments were not as stable as others.
hmm, yeah, and yeah, just having a tube of paint, being able to paint outside
Yeah.
freely and easily and portably, you know, it's like the printing press. It's kind of a revolution.
It's interesting though to see these two pictures side by side because the Renoir just it feels so casual compared to the Manet.
Hmm.
The Manet feels a lot more studied, even though it's still kind of like the dog in its moment of triumph after the battle against the doll.
Yeah.
And I mean, in that sense, it's very playful, but it still feels much more controlled, I guess, and much
Or
more
staged
thoughtful.
even.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
So, do you have a favorite between the two?
Mm, I mean, I love Manet. I really do. I think it's just some of my favorite moments in museums have been standing in front of Manet's. So that would be hard to not choose Manet, but much like the guy in The Princess Bride, Wallace Shawn, when he can't decide, when he's like talking himself into different things while he's trying to poison people. I do love this Renoir. I mean, just bringing that sort of like dreamy, airy, fluffy, sweet kind of approach that he's so known for to a dog. I love this approach more for dogs than like, for example, women. Some of the women. Um, so yeah, I don't know. Can I love them equally? Are they my twin babies that I can love equally?
I think that's fair. I think to open your heart and love dogs in all their forms is a perfectly valid stance. Um, I do have a fondness for both. I think there's no wrong answer. There's something I really do like about the Manet though, just because I don't know. It kind of reminds me of to draw a comparison to a more contemporary artist. Ryan Berkeley does these like pet portraits that seem very very traditional and like rendered meticulously in some ways and makes the animal look very dignified, but then it's like it's a dog in sunglasses and it's wearing a Hawaiian type shirt with hot dogs on it, and the piece is
Yes.
called Cool Dog, but the dog is wearing hot dogs. And like I love people who put a lot of thought and attention to detail into something that is playful that other people would dismiss or dash off. Like I really love the fact that Manet is clearly taking his time and thoughtful and deliberate about every single element there. And that's
Mhm.
not to say that Renoir wasn't, like he had his own style. It was just it's a different vibe he's going for.
Yeah.
But I really like the I like to see evidence of thought and work, and it's almost like as you're talking about like, well, that's the name of the dog being up there is a nod to this. It's these Easter eggs that give me the joy of discovery and a smug sense of satisfaction when I feel like I get what he's doing there,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know.
yeah. Yeah, I think all of these elements that we're talking about feel like ways to connect with the art, with the person,
Mhm.
over these decades of time and space and where you're from and all these things. And it's the same for dogs and animals in general in art. It's like it might be really difficult to imagine yourself living in 1800s in France and like, really there's a lot to process about what that world was and how it might have felt to be there, but you can still feel an immediate connection to a dog and how someone felt about a dog and how that dog was a part of their lives if you have pets in your life. I think that's one magical thing about looking at museums through this lens and looking at collections and looking at arts.
Oh, I love that point. As the dogs being a common accessible entry point that we can all relate to. And that's killing me because that was going to be my big idea to wrap this up in the final segment. So now we're going to take a short break for me to scramble, rethink my plans, and then we'll see if I can stick the landing. Welcome back. My guest today, again, Jessica Poundstone, the author of the new book, Museum of Dogs, A Romp Through Art History for Dog People. And, before the break, you were getting at what I consider to be a brilliant point about how dogs give us this point of connection with art history that at so many times can feel esoteric and inaccessible to people. I mean, if you walk into a museum without a certain amount of background knowledge, to some extent, it's like, why do I care about this canvas that some dude stumbled around his barn and spilled paint on? But when I see a dog, it's like, I get what he's doing there. And there's more to discover. There's more to appreciate. It still rewards those who do the study, but there's something for everyone. And I love that it's like dogs. They're welcoming in so many ways. But I wanted to wrap up this episode by trying to get some more final thoughts. Like, as you were researching and developing this book and writing this book, were there any unexpected discoveries, insights, aha moments, things that came to you in the course of all of the time you spent reading, looking? What stuck out to you?
Yeah, I think the fact that every one of these objects in this book, whether it's a painting, a sculpture, there was a collection of beadwork items that was like an eyeglasses case made by artisans in Mexico. Every single one of these objects is an entry point for so many stories. And, as I was researching each one, even ones that maybe were by an anonymous artisan or something, there's something to learn there from the time period, from who collected it, why they collected it. So in my mind, it's just this treasure trove of stories that are absolutely fascinating. And, I'm not like some history buff. I like art. And I do like learning these stories. I think, history is are collections of stories. And I think when you can find those moments and feel like you're connected to people, feel like you're connected to these dogs, it's just a way of feeling connected to all humans throughout time and all dogs throughout time. It was a very proud to be a human moment for me as I met these other humans and heard these other stories.
And I think, one of the points that you just made that was a bit of an aha moment for me and an insight I want to repeat and really emphasize there. You talked about how even a piece where the artist's name may be unknown, there's still a story in who collected it and why, and that art is not just an artist putting stuff out for, it's not like it's not a monologue where the artist puts something out and they're just yelling at all of us. It is more social. It's socially constructed. These stories, these histories are about how people interact with the work, how people respond to it, what it says about us as a society. And I think that is a absolutely beautiful point that you are making, and I want to sign on to and pretend that I made that connection and had that insight too.
I'm happy to share it with you in the
This,
world, you know.
this is why I like talking to people who are smarter than me, because you're laying down all this wisdom, and I'm sitting here just looking at the adorable dog vase in the background
Oh
of your
yeah,
studio.
that's a good one, Chris. Yeah, that's Katie Kimmel. Katie Kimmel does dog bases, and in fact, I think she just had a drop recently. You should really get it on that.
Okay, so I'll have to add some more links to the show notes because obviously for listeners interested in the book, I'm going to have the links in there, but also Katie Kimmel, you said, that's an artist I'm not familiar with. So I will have to look her up and make sure that I can add her to the show notes so listeners can find out more about these dog vases because, that's
Yeah,
pretty
you want
rad,
one.
too.
You want one for sure.
So I guess other than telling people to buy the book, are there any final thoughts or takeaways? What do you want listeners to hear and to appreciate, to notice about dogs in art history?
It's fun. If you go to a museum and you're dreading it, go look for dogs. You will find them. I guarantee you'll find at least one dog in any major art museum. And also, I think just more generally, I would love for people to feel free to connect with whatever they are attracted to at museums. You don't have to connect with everything. You don't have to look at everything if you go. Um, Trust yourself. Trust your taste. That's telling you something about who you are, what you like, and don't let somebody tell you what you quote should like or have to like. Like what you like, pay attention to it, and by following that path, you're going to learn more about what you like. You're going to learn more about the art. You're going to be more excited about it. It doesn't have to be stuffy and academic. It can be very visceral and connective.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Your tastes are valid and, whatever appeals to you is totally fine. You don't have to like everything that everyone else likes. Even if you somehow don't like dogs, that's okay, because there is something you can find that you will enjoy and appreciate. And if I can just yes and that comment, I want to say the parent and the teacher in me is sitting there thinking, how rad would it be to take your kids to the museum with a little scavenger hunt or something like that? Try to, give people the objective to find the most adorable dog, the ugliest dog, the most dismissible dog, the dog that seems a little pretentious.
Yes.
Come up with all the different descriptors you can for the different types of dogs and see how many you and your kids or your friends can tick off the list, because I bet that would be a fun museum game that would help you discover stuff you never thought was out there.
I'll meet you at the Met. We'll give it a try. We'll pilot it.
I
Have a great time.
I love that idea. I had a great time with this discussion. I do want to say a big thank you once again, Jessica Poundstone. Listeners, the book is Museum of Dogs, a romp through art history for dog people. It's just fun, and the world needs more of that. Thank you so much once again.
Thank you so much.
This concludes this week's episode of Who Arted, part of the Airwave Media Podcast Network. If you found this tolerable, please leave a rating or review on your favorite podcast app. You can find images of the work being discussed this week and every week on social media at Who Arted Podcast on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, and of course on the website whoartedpodcast.com. Podcast done.